The thing about our families is that we're stuck with them. Granted, for some of us, this isn't such a terrible fate. We sort of like our families and don't mind being connected to them for all of eternity. Sure, they may be weird, but they are our kind of weird. For others of us, however, this prospect is a bit more daunting. You see, while we know that all families have some level of dysfunction, we also know that some are more dysfunctional than others. And if we happen to be in one of those families and want to overcome that dysfunction, it takes some work. Friends, it takes work to resist those instinctual pulls towards those unhealthy patterns that we have seen repeated from generation to generation, especially because it takes us a few years to recognize those patterns to begin with. The truth is, most of us recognize our family dysfunction only after we have been firmly embedded in that dysfunction, which makes getting out of it challenging, to say the least. Friends, it's challenging to deal with our family dysfunction, but it's not impossible. Not only do we live in a time of extraordinary possibilities for seeking help through mental health professionals, but as a people of faith, we have the benefit of years of collected wisdom for how to overcome some really significant dysfunction. And so today, on this first Sunday of the month, on this day in which we prepare to share a meal together, let us listen for a moment together to the next tale in the saga of a family that has taken dysfunction to new heights, with an ear towards how individuals manage to rise above it. Today, friends, we move to the next generation in the family tree that began with Abraham and Sarah. And though it began dysfunctional, we have only seen that dysfunction increase through the generations, as Isaac became the patriarch, as Jacob and Esau fought over their birthrights, and now, as problems with Jacob and his sons are discovered. Now, for those of us who have dealt with any dysfunction in our own families, and let's face it, that's all of us, there's something comforting in the fact that God chose such a messed up family to be the bearers of the covenant. In fact, we're nearing the end of the first book in our Bible, and it's a long book, and we have yet to meet a healthy family. The truth is, every family we've encountered thus far in our Bible has been dysfunctional, like really dysfunctional, starting with the first family when one brother murdered the other. And if we've read the other books in our Bible, we know it doesn't get much better after this one. And for some reason, that gives us hope. Hope that despite our own dysfunction, God can still be at work in our lives. Friends, the good news of our faith is that over and over again, God chooses to work through people and families who don't do everything right, who make poor decisions, who really mess things up. Which means that God just might be able to work with us. And because of that, we all have hope. With that in mind, today we hear the story of the family of Jacob. We've spent the last few weeks remembering together how Jacob got to this place, how his father Isaac had dealt with his own family issues by bringing them to bear on his sons, how he had played favorites, and the kind of damage that it had done in the relationship between Jacob and Esau. And though we followed along as Jacob painfully learned to overcome the ill effects of that favoritism, as we join him today, we see him falling back into that same learned pattern of his own family. We probably recognize this. After all, we know that without significant work, we often fall back into the patterns that were modeled for us. This is particularly true in families that have dealt with addictions like alcoholism. Without work, that addiction has a way of being passed along from generation to generation, much like we see with Jacob's favoritism today. Now, for those who've been following along carefully, you might note that Jacob's name has been changed to Israel. And you would be right. It actually happens twice in Genesis. But for some reason, both names continue to be used in the stories, almost interchangeably. Now, it's possible that there was some scribal mistake or an error that was made by the compilers of Genesis, but maybe there's more to it than that. Last week we learned that the name Jacob is a play on the word for heel, as in Jacob came out grabbing his brother's heel, reminiscent of Jacob's struggle in his own family. His name was changed to Israel, meaning one who strives with God. Only after he struggled to let go of those issues of his childhood and live out the calling that God had placed on his life. Perhaps the fact that both names continue to be used is an indication that Jacob still struggles. That even though he knows how he has been called to live and is attempting to do so, he still struggles with those old ways of life. In other words, even though he wants to live as Israel, he can't seem to fully let go of Jacob. Friends, we know what this is like. We know that even after we put the struggles of our past behind us, they often find a way of coming up again despite our best efforts. We know that as much as we might try to get rid of them, they are a part of us. And as we said a few weeks ago, we wouldn't be us without them. Sure, it would be nice if once we responded to the call of the gospel, everything went smoothly and we made all of the right decisions. But friends, that's not how it works. That's not how the freedom that God has given us to live in this world works. No, bad things will continue to happen to us, and we will continue to make some really dumb mistakes. What changes when we accept that call of the gospel is that we recognize we won't have to make those mistakes alone. What changes is that now we understand that the grace of God is present despite our mistakes, despite our imperfections. And once we recognize that, our best response is to share the good news. Our story today begins with Israel's 17-year-old son, Joseph, coming in for helping the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, out in the fields. We're told that he came in and gave his father a bad report about them. He comes in and he tells his father his brothers have been doing poorly. This is the first thing that we see Joseph do in our scriptures, and it isn't really the best introduction. He's snitching on his brothers. To be fair, maybe he'd been asked to do this by his father, but it's enough to give us an inkling as to why his 11 brothers don't really care for him. Well, that and the fact that we're told Israel loved Joseph more than any of them. It says he liked him best because he was the son of his old age. Now, technically, Benjamin, being the youngest, had a better claim to being the son of Israel's old age. Joseph was actually only the second youngest. But Rachel, Israel's favorite wife, and Joseph's mother, died during childbirth with Benjamin. And it's likely there was some resentment because of that. Regardless of the reason, though, Israel makes it clear that he loves Joseph the most and shows it to Joseph by giving him a gift of a long robe with sleeves, or perhaps a striped robe. dreaming coat, but it was enough to get his brother's blood boiling. To make matters worse, Joseph decided to tell his brothers his dreams. Joseph told his brother that he had a dream in which they were all binding sheaves in a field, and his sheaf stood upright, and their sheaves gathered around and bowed down to it. They hated that dream. Then Joseph managed to earn rebuke even from his dad when he said that he also dreamed that the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to him. We sort of have to wonder whether Joseph was just painfully naive as to how what he said would be interpreted by his family, or whether he knew exactly what he was doing and was just trying to get their goats. We don't know. In his defense, he couldn't really help the fact that his father liked him best. It was the family pattern into which he was born, and he was simply living into the role that had been laid out before him. Still, we get the sense that he would have been really annoying to have been around. It would be like saying to a group of friends, "Hey, I keep having this dream in which I'm so much better than you." Isn't that amazing? When the story picks up again, we're told that the brothers are out tending the field, and Israel sends Joseph after him. But he ends up wandering through some fields, unable to find his brothers. And by the time he actually finds them, having received some help, his brothers have decided to kill him. When they see him coming, they say, "Here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that wild animals have devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." Now, up until this point, we felt badly for his brothers. They've been the ones working out in the field while Joseph has gone and told his dad all the bad things that they've ever done. Not to mention the fact that they've been asked to listen patiently while Joseph told them about his dreams, in which he was always better than them. But here, they cross a line. They decide to kill him. They really cross a line. And while most of us have not made this particular bad decision, we do sort of recognize the desperate nature of it. We know that there comes a time when we reach our breaking point and we make snap decisions. The trouble is when we wait for the situation to get so bad that we snap, we often make poor decisions, as is the case here. Fortunately, we're told that Reuben, the firstborn among them, convinced them to throw him into a pit without killing him. And then the narrator tells us that Reuben was actually going to go get him and take him to his father later. Maybe. That was the plan. And that's what they went with at first. When Joseph showed up, they took his coat and threw him into a pit without water, but they didn't kill him. But then their brother Judah had a better idea. He saw a caravan coming and thought they might profit from this misadventure. So now this shouldn't surprise us either. After all, we know that money tends to add fuel to the fires of dysfunction within a family. We're told that Judah says, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he's our brother, our own flesh." Now Judah's logic is a little strange here. He's basically saying, "Come on guys, this is our brother, we deserve to profit from him." But his brothers don't call him on it, and when the traders pass by, they lift Joseph out of the pit and sell him into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders take Joseph back to Egypt. This is kind of a strange story. A story of a dysfunctional family and the problems caused when parents favor one child over others. What's interesting is that there's no mention of God in the entire story. There's nothing to say that Joseph was particularly exceptional, save for some God has been at work until much later. But friends, whether we recognize it or not, God is there. Doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen to us. We will probably all fall into some pits at some point in our lives, whether they are literal or metaphorical. But it means that God will be with us from before the fall until after. That's good news. It means that we can be stuck in the middle of our dysfunction, in the bottom of our deepest pits in life, and know that we are not alone. This is not only helpful for those of us who are stuck in dysfunction, but for those of us who don't know how to help others we see from their dysfunction. The good news is that God is present with them even when we don't know how to be. God is present because we are a part of God's family. We are a part of God's family, each of us, young and old, black and white, male and female, gay and straight. We are each children of God, and because of